No one would have believed that at the turn of the 21st century, the city-state of Singapore was being secretly watched by a fanatical terror organization with links to Al-Qaeda. Few people would have considered the possibility of an attack happening on Singaporean soil.
If the attacks had been successful, there would have been hundreds and hundreds of casualties.
But slowly, toward the end of 2001, plans were culminating with potentially devastating consequences. Singapore, home to one of Southeast Asia's most economically stable and multicultural societies. Over 4.5 million people populate this city-state, covering a landmass slightly smaller than that of New York City. A combination of strong governance and miraculously economic growth over the last 40 years has given rise to a secure and stable way of life that some say is now taken for granted by many of its citizens. But in 1997, chilling plans were being put together to undermine that peace and security and to ultimately change the Singaporean way of life forever.
US military personnel will be dropped off from the bus and they will walk towards the MRT station. And this is one of the buses, one of the regular buses that ferry the military personnel from Sembawang to Yishun MRT station.
Rush hour in the northern suburbs. A young Singaporean man stands opposite the entrance to Yishun MRT train station and records on video the scene in front of him.
This is the bicycle bay as viewed from the footpath that leads towards the MRT station. You will notice that some of the boxes that are placed on the motorcycles, these are the same type of boxes which we intend to use.
Assuming the guise of a tourist filming a holiday video around Singapore, the man is describing his intention for a sinister plan. He aims to detonate a bomb to cause as many human casualties as possible. At the time of the recording, the local authorities know nothing of his presence.
There's the entrance of the temple with many vehicles parked there. You'll notice there's a drainage hole. It might be useful.
Having gathered his necessary reconnaissance material, unbeknown to the man making his getaway, his videotape would later be found in one of the most dangerous places in the world. Nearby, in the northern suburbs, a condominium manager finishes work. His name is Ibrahim Maiden. Maiden is a self-taught religious scholar. Despite no formal training in religion, he conducts Islamic classes to young Muslim men in small private groups on a regular basis. But these classes disguise a secret agenda. At first, Maiden talks broadly about Islam and advises on ways to become a better Muslim. But after a while, he directs his lectures toward more specific topics.
Typically what would happen would be he would conduct these small religious classes within these houses. After each class and during the class, he would bring up instances of how how the Muslims around the world have been disenfranchised. He would bring up examples of things like Bosnia, Chechnya, several other countries. Thereafter, after class, there would be a couple of students who would always be a little bit more keen to know a bit more about what he meant. They would stay back, ask him a couple of questions.
After several weeks of repeated classes, Maidan has created a close group of trusted individuals. Now he preaches his very personal views on how various governments and individuals oppose Islam around the world. And then, most crucially, the need to rise up and fight back to change the system.
They had what we call an in-group speak. So they would talk about it, they would understand that it would be their religious duty. There is a level of secrecy that surrounds the entire conversation, with the understanding that this needs to be done, it is urgent, and there is a need for them to come together collectively to change the system.
But unbeknown to Maidan's impressionable students, the man standing in front of them is the Singapore operational leader of the fanatical organization called Jemaah Islamiyah, known as JI. Maidan is a charismatic man whose motives are entrenched by the work of Islamic rebels who fought in Afghanistan in the 1970s.
He was so impressed with the Mujahideen who had then liberated Afghanistan. He even entertained the idea of getting Singaporean Muslims to go and live in Afghanistan, which he considered a truly Islamic state.
Maidan students are being assessed to see whether they will join JI, and for some, go on to make what he claims as the ultimate sacrifice in the name of their religion. Namely, a fearless campaign of violence to eventually overthrow Singapore and turn it into an Islamic state. JI calls that campaign an armed jihad.
The JI members were promised martyrdom if they died in the cause of jihad.
As twilight descends across Singapore and people head home after work, behind the closed doors of another suburban address, the Singapore JI cell is busy playing host to another secret meeting. A Singaporean JI cell member by the name of Khalil Jafar is present. Jafar works as a printer, but he secretly harbors a specialist's knowledge in explosives and bomb making.
The JI in Singapore depends very much on video reconnaissance of their targets, and this is usually done over several visits. At the conclusion of their visit, what they would do is to compile the videos together into a composite video, which will then be used for their final preparations and planning.
JI is planning to target American and Singaporean civilians who use the shuttle bus, which ferries passengers from Yishun MRT to the U.S. Navy base at Sembawang, some 3 kilometers away. At the time, neither the authorities nor any known member of the public have any idea of a terrorist organization presence in Singapore. JI is operating covertly and completely undetected. Before the attacks can be carried out, JI needs the blessings of their most senior authority. In mid-1999, Jafar sets off from Singapore, bound for Afghanistan. His mission is to present the plan to attack the shuttle bus at Yishun MRT train station to senior members of Al-Qaeda for their approval. As Singapore prepares to sleep, several members of a fanatical organization called Jemaah Islamiyah, known as JI, are hard at work in the northern suburbs. After devising a deadly plan of attack on the Yishun MRT train station, one of the cell members, called Khalil Jafar, leaves Singapore to seek approval from Al-Qaeda. JI cell member Khalil Jafar arrives from Singapore to brief Mohammed Atef on his plan. Atef is number 3 in command with Al-Qaeda and a close aide to Osama bin Laden.
He briefed them in English because they could not speak Malay, and Khalim's Arabic was limited. After watching the video, Al-Qaeda leader Mohammed Atef gave the go-ahead for the plan to be carried out.
Analysts say that when JI plans to attack targets in the name of their religion, they would call such an act an armed jihad. However, among the Islamic faith, the real definition of jihad is rooted in a complex and delicate history.
The classical understanding of jihad is struggle. It's not armed struggle per se, but it's struggle. In fact, many classical sources refer to jihad as a struggle against oneself to overcome one's baser instincts. So it's a struggle to be a better person.
But JI promulgates jihad as an act of violence. Violence as a means to achieve their ultimate goal of not only overthrowing Singapore and turning it into an Islamic state, but to do the same across multiple countries in Southeast Asia. One by one, these countries would eventually be liberated to achieve a superstate known as the Islamic Caliphate.
JI has always believed in the Al-Qaeda worldview that the only way to achieve the goal of creating a pan-Southeast Asian Islamic state is to use force, essentially because the governments in Southeast Asia are either secular or believe in governing philosophies that are, in the JI view, anathema to the Islamic conception of the world.
But in the case of the proposed attack at Yishun MRT train station in Singapore, JI is not targeting political icons, but instead, ordinary civilians.
Civilians are seen as guilty because of they pay taxes and they give political support to governments that then go ahead and oppress Muslims in different parts of the world, like Palestine or Afghanistan or even Chechnya or Bosnia. So to that extent, civilians in the JI and Al-Qaeda conception of the world are not innocent.
One chilling example where civilians are regarded with little innocence happens in October 2002 on the Indonesian island of Bali, when 2 massive explosive devices go off, killing over 200 people. Former JI terrorist Idris played a key logistics role in the bombing of a third target, a U.S. consulate building in Bali, acting as a link between the planners and the field operatives. Following his 8-year jail sentence, this is the first time Idris has appeared in a television interview. He recalls being indoctrinated to the JI movement and learning of JI's interpretation of jihad.
Isi dari penghantar itu, yang penghantar kita ke dalam itu hanya dikenalkan bagaimana perjuangan, seputar perjuangan. Yang dimaksud dengan yang saya terangkan tadi, yang maksud dengan perjuangan itu ya bentuknya jihad. Pemahaman yang mengarah kepada jihad ya. Ya dari awalnya memang yang namanya jihad intinya kita peperangan, berperang ya.
And that war, according to JI indoctrination, is an order sent from the highest authority.
Perintah jihad itu kan dari Allah, bukan dari manusia. Karena kita beribadah kepada Allah, apa yang diperintahkan kita lakukan. Berarti itu pesan Allah, perintah Allah.
Outside Yishun MRT train station in Singapore, the so-called armed jihad being planned against commuters using the shuttle bus is within weeks of execution.